where the legends live.
Bob, tell us about the old record hops, because that was always a lot of fun. You know, the Whoa record hops, and we
yeah, that was quite a situation. We started those in 1954, and at that time, if you never knew him, you missed one of the most remarkable people in my lifetime, Guy Harris.
Yeah.
Wasn't he an incredible guy?
Yeah,
he was our program director at the time, and he did the wildest things, and also did some incredibly good things. And one of them was record hops. He realized that there was a void for entertainment, and we had now broken out of the networks, and we were live music personalities all the time. Where do we go to let our personalities be seen?
Exposure, yeah.
So the first thing he did was go up to it would have been Hamilton Lake, and talk to the Watkins brothers up at Hamilton Lake at Cold Springs Resort. So Cal Stewart, Bullwinkle, and I go up the first night with Guy Harris for this record hop, and we've been plugging it. Nice big dance hall, and all of a sudden about 150 people show up, and nobody danced. They're all sitting around the edge kind of looking at us. You know, we figured, now what do we do? Well, it didn't work too good, but Harris, you know, undaunted, came back. Next week, he said, I got an idea. So he goes to a florist, makes a deal for a couple hundred boutonnieres and a couple hundred rosebuds. So the first 200 girls got the rosebuds, the guys got the boutonnieres, and we came in and we started to hammer it. So we ended up with about 350 people, but they're all sitting around the edge. They weren't dancing. And that was one of the problems of the time. It was after the war, and the big bands had pretty well gone, and they just weren't doing it. So the next time up, we do the snowball dance, the reverse invite, and the whole thing. And to make a long story short, by the end of the summer, not only did we have that thing just brimming full of people, we had also gone to Bledsoe's Beach at that time. And then I think we branched off and went over to Tippecanoe,
Salina, Ohio,
and later went all the way down Salina and those places.
Yeah, that dance hall.
And it was incredible. We'd bring at that time recording stars when they were very accessible, and we'd bring a recording star with us, and we'd have all his pictures or her pictures or their pictures. They'd do the autographs, they'd mime a couple of records, and we'd go up to a place like Bledsoe's and have 1,400 kids in that building, and when I go up there and look now, it scares me to think, how did they ever get there?
But what a terrific opportunity, though, for kids in those days to mix and meet each other. There was, especially in the summertime when you didn't have the school environment, you know, it was just a great idea.
Whoa record hops were an event. They were a happening.
To carry on with that story, I remember at Cold Springs at Hamilton Lake, some of the children or students would go out and hide liquor in the hubcaps of their car. They'd go out and get a drink, and they'd screw the hubcap back on, and then eventually fights would break out, you know. So, to contrast and follow up on that same story, I had a record hop 2 years ago at Cold Springs Resort, and we had over 1,500 there, standing room only, the same they advertised, the same students that showed up at my hop, where they'd have a little too much to drink and fights would break out. They were perfect ladies and gentlemen sitting at a table having one beer, you know, and I thought, these are the kids that used to get into fights at my hop.
Yeah.
Now they're perfect ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
But I remember those days at
They were
Cold
probably
Springs.
still hiding it in the hubcaps.
There you go. Right.
Same car.
Well, you know, we did them everywhere. I mean, the summer hops that Bob mentioned, of course, were traditional. But all year long, at the high schools, civic clubs, any place they could have a dance they wanted, a Whoa record. Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, we had the hot boxes. Go over there, and the kids would just be packed in, dancing to these songs, just playing plain old 45 RPM records on old big raunchy speakers, none of this state-of-the-art equipment you have now. But they were so popular.
We were still all the way through the late 80s. We were still getting a couple of thousand people at the Grand Wayne Center.
Do you remember the big,
all those nostalgia hops?
up at, up at Rome City, Sylvan Lake, they had this gigantic aluminum barge.
At Sylvan Bell, wasn't it?
No, I don't, that was
At Rome City.
in Rome City.
I had a record hop on that boat one night.
So we go up to do these record hops, and we get out, maybe we get 80 or 90 kids a cruise, and away we go. Well, the minute we get the music going, the thing would start to bounce up and down. We couldn't keep the music going.
I don't think I ever lost any of those.
So now the guy's scratching his head, and he comes up with this great big wash tub, puts an inner tube in it, and puts the, remember that, puts the turntable on top of the inner tube, and it worked because it wasn't bouncing around.
Bouncing around,
Oh, was that ever funny?
Kind of like when Smokey would walk across the stage.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, those were very popular. Those and Air Aces basketball.
Yeah.
You know, we had that basketball team started, what, about 66, I think it was?
Ron has a Purple Heart from the Air Aces. I think the only Purple Heart ever awarded.
Really?
Yeah.
You got
They
one
took me to the
that.
hospital one night. Well, a guy, it was after the water routine. You know, we have the the pail of confetti.
Yeah, Harlem Globetrotters.
And then eventually you get the real water out and
Yeah.
you splash somebody. Well, somebody got splashed, but the water, they left it on the court.
Bingo.
I went running down there full speed, and all of a sudden, it's like one of those cartoons where the guy jumps up and the legs are, like that. And I just landed flat on the front of my face, right in my nose and teeth, just bashed in there.
Oh, boy.
And then I look down and I see all of this red around me, and I'm going, uh-oh. That could only be for
Wasn't the
me.
water, yeah.
No, it wasn't water, no. And they, Ron Latham and Dick Miller took me to the hospital that night.
Yeah.
And I never sued anybody. I just want you to know,
I'll tell you,
folks.
one of the things that I remember to this day, though, because I think it was a couple of days before you could actually talk on the air.
Yeah.
And so, when I saw you the next day to see how you were, I remember you telling me, I went to a dentist. And
his
the
name
dentist's name was Dr. Crash.
Yes.
Oh, you're kidding.
He may be watching the show tonight. I was like,
my God,
Dr. Crash.
As a matter of fact, his name was Jack Crash, and he was over on State Street, and he calls Art and Dean on Sports Talk almost every night. You'll hear him.
Really?
When you hear somebody named Jack, you'll know that's him. And he's retired now, but that's a true story. So we took our lumps here and there.
Yeah, but the money we made for those schools, Bob, you were in promotion at the time and
That
playing
was
on
a
the team.
situation where we were looking for another venue to get involved in, and it seemed to be the right thing. And that's when we went into the promotion about the air aces.
Yeah.
And so then we had the air aces and put the team together, and then we realized, now wait a minute, we're going to be out and we're going to be playing a lot of faculties, a lot of athletes on those faculties who have played a lot of basketball, et cetera.
We're good.
So we figured, got to have a ringer or two. So the first ringer we got was Bob Pelkington. And now Pelkington, when he played at Xavier University, was the nation's leading rebounder in the senior year of college. Then we felt, well, maybe we better try somebody else just to be sure, so we bring in Ron Latham. Now, Ron Latham played at Ball State, and anything from 25 feet on in, Latham was deadly. He had one of the, he'd be a millionaire today in the NBA.
Another Reggie Miller,
would he hang it, no doubt. And then the word got around, and all of a sudden we end up with Neil Reinke.
Yeah.
And of course, Dick Miller was on staff at the time. And I'd played a fair amount of basketball in my lifetime, as had some of the other guys. Chevy played with us. And we had a pretty respectable team. And we'd go into these various schools, as I think the format always went. And the people were incredible. They have these big lunches after it was over, and we just have a great time. But if
Yes,
you
we
ended
did.
up with one of these faculties that were chippy and trying to show the kids how to go,
We took some
unbelievable.
bruises on some of
we
those,
would
yeah.
we'd drub them.
Yeah.
But if it was a group that was having a lot of fun, there'd be no way we could win. We'd stumble our
We'd
way
make it
through
close,
those games,
yeah.
and it was just incredible.
I can
Tell
remember
him,
Jack
we did the
Underwood
trick
would-
stuff.
Jack would go in as the announcer, and of course
Yeah.
Bob was the coach. Jack would go into the locker room before the game started of the opposing team, and he'd say, now fellas, remember this is for charity and this is for fun. We want to try to keep the score as close as we possibly can. We'll keep our disc jockeys in, which is really what the people came to see. Unless you guys decide you want to run up a score on us. If you want to run up a score, our disc jockeys will sit down and our ringers will take over and they'll embarrass you. And there were a few times where the disc jockeys would sit down and the ringers would go in and we'd run 20 points up on them, and then Jack would go back to them on their bench and say, you fellas want to go back to show business or do you want to play basketball?
Part of the routine, Chevy would always work on the afternoon traffic, and if we were within 30 or 40 miles, the minute he got off the air, he'd wheel it up there, jump into his gear, and he'd always get there at halftime. So we'd build this thing, and here Chevy'd come trotting out at halftime, and da-da-da. So we'd whip in the old basketball, and from center court, he'd let one fly. Now, there was week after week that Chevy, he just never got there.
Never
with it.
made it.
This one night he walks out somewhere up around Angola. Maybe it wasn't Angola. He walked out at center court. He let that thing fly. Ching! Nothing but net.
What, you broke a guy's leg?
Well, this fellow, his religion, I don't know if he's Amish or what, but they weren't allowed to have radios. And finally, they did get a radio, and they were listening to it the night before. And when Wowo signed off at midnight, the radio went dead. And he was lying there. This is his first morning that he had a radio in the house.
That was back when you used to sign off on Sunday night, and then
Every night.
Yeah.
Every night.
1 o'clock.
In those days, we signed off every night at midnight or 1. So he was lying there in the morning at 5 o'clock in a dark room, not thinking of anything. And right at 5 o'clock in the morning in his ear, I said, "Good morning." Boom! He gave one leap and fell out of bed and broke his leg.
These days, as Don, as you pointed out earlier, you'd have been sued. wouldn't
Browns
you?
for all suit
could
down.
be.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, he would have won that suit, but he didn't have a leg to stand on.
Well, that's the end of this program.
This man has not changed a bit.
No, he hasn't. No. In
any
fact,
of these.
you're right. No.
I think we have him to keep things
Unfortunately,
going
he
today.
hasn't changed a bit.
Bob, were you in a station when we had a promotion out at the Coliseum We all had to ride a burro.
Sure.
Yeah.
I was the critter that put you on that burro, my friend. I was doing the promotion work.
And the other
There's
critter,
a couple of pictures in there they can
we
show.
got ready to race, and John Cigna pulled out a safety pin and stuck my burro in the rear end.
That's right.
My burro took off.
He
I'm
was
way
trying to-
ahead of everybody.
He was aiming for
He
you.
was trying to stick it in your rear end. He missed. He hit the donkey.
I never thought of that.
Well, what about the
And
elephant?
I started, well, we'll get the elephant in a minute.
Okay.
And I started to roll off the side of the burro, but he kept going. And I gradually kept getting lower and lower until the very end, I went plunk right
Just
on the
before the
ground.
finish line, he fell off, and
You
you
were
know.
going down the court on that donkey, and it stopped instantly, and you kept going. You almost went into the boards, remember? There at
Well,
the,
I knew I
community
fell off, but I
stands.
didn't know which direction.
But see,
at the
that was
time.
that donkey patrol the Shrine had. So when we got the donkeys, I said, look, I want a real nice, docile donkey for Steve. And he said, here's a good one. And he was. He was a good donkey till somebody whacked him on the hind end and he took
Yeah,
off.
it
And
was
you could
John
see Bobby
Cigna.
kept stiffening up the farther he got. All of a sudden, oh, Mr. Bill.
Why was it that all of our promotion managers through the years wanted us to do these things in front of standing room only crowds at the Coliseum?
Because everybody wanted to see him, that's why. Well, I remember, Bob, the Coliseum before every Comet Hockey opening game of the season.
Always had a big
And every
promotion.
sport vacation boat show, they had a big promotion
Huge
with us.
promotion,
And Bob,
yeah.
we were doing one stupid thing after another.
Didn't you have
Broom.
Including
Broom ball.
fighting with alligators.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I was going to say,
I've
didn't
got
you,
a picture
didn't
in
you
there.
wrestle an alligator
John
one
Cigna
time?
and I, and we're in wetsuits. And we had an alligator. We promoted like the Dickens. We were going to wrestle alligators at the Sport Vacation in Boat Show. Well, when we came out, we had the alligator, little baby one about this long, see, harmless.
We threw him in the
Cigna
tank.
was scared to death of that little alligator. He wouldn't get within 20 feet of it. And so once we got in the water, and of course act like we were wrestling, and I came up with the thing and came to Cigna, and he took off running around the Coliseum.
Yeah.
And I chased him with that. The crowd thought he was a put on. He was afraid of it.
Why would you be scared of an alligator this big unless it had a rating book?
Well,
But
You're right. He hasn't changed a bit.
I could carry that story on, but I won't.
but then Bob and I were on elephants one time. Do you remember that?
Thanks to him, he got us into it.
Was that your?
That was riding from the railroad yards to the Coliseum, yeah, when the circus came.
And I looked up at that big elephant. I thought, how in the world can I get on his back? And there was no saddle gear. I finally used a rope or something to get up on him. And after he walked 2 steps, I knew that I could never make it to the Coliseum without falling off the pavement. So I grabbed the rope and fell or jumped off. And we had a young couple from Portland, Indiana, riding on the elephant next to me. They
was a
might even be
contest,
listening. And about 2 weeks later, they sent me a tie with an elephant on it
There you go.
as a memory of my 2-foot.
You said it was an elephant with a tie on it.
Well, it was when
What
I
you
told
told
on
me.
me.
You know, one of the great promotions I remember with Bob, and I think some of you were involved in that thing. It was a Comet opener, and we opened on Halloween night. So we had a special race. At each end where the nets were, we had a little basket. And we had tricycles, and in the middle was this big barrel with apples in it. So you'd have to ride your
I
tricycle to
remember
the
that,
middle,
yeah.
Bob the apple,
Bob the
run to the
apple.
other end.
And that water was cold,
And
too.
it was cold, but not only that, but Bob Sievers never, ever gave it anything less than 100%. And he was getting frustrated going after the apple. And the next thing I see, water squirting out of the barrel. Sievers in head first, right to the bottom, and up he comes with an apple.
With an apple.
On those same promotions, you remember when we had the wheelchair races
Yeah.
out there? Were any of you on there?
There's some pictures in there of that.
Somebody had cautioned me not to do it too energetically to start out with, but I'm in my wheelchair and I'm way out ahead of everybody. I thought, oh boy, I got this race run easily. 10 feet from the finish line, I got cramps in both arms and sat still, and somebody else won. And
We all passed you.
You remember when
yeah,
they?
you all passed.
You know, so many people, though, of great import would come to that radio station over the years, though. I can remember, Bob, you told me a story about the time they brought Hirohito's horse up in the elevator.
Oh yeah, they did. A big white horse.
Why?
The 3rd floor in the Gaskins building.
Yeah.
Fourth floor.
What about
Why?
there?
Why did they do that?
It was some anniversary, and he was in town.
Yeah, so they brought the horse up.
The horse or
Brought the horse and up in the elevator. Now I don't know if Hirohito was along or not, but his horse came up, and they brought the
doubt it.
horse in the studio.
What
The
year
horse,
was
the
this?
horse was an naysayer.
I don't remember what year it was.
The horse wasn't talking.
1943.
They brought the horse up in the elevator.
You know,
They
but a lot
brought
of
the
times,
horse up in the elevator. It fit in the elevator.
Oh, my
yeah.
God.
a lot of times the promoters of these events would forget that we were a radio station and not a television station.
Yeah.
And being out in the afternoon, they would parade people up. I had a guy up there one time who was the fastest draw in the West. He could draw a Colt 45 6-shooter.
On radio.
Shoot, and put the thing back in his holster, and faster than the blink of an eye. And here we are on radio, yeah. And I don't know what to say. So he was appearing at Glenbrook, and Glenbrook wanted the guy to be on the air. So I said, well, Mr. So-and-so, would you go ahead and demonstrate? And I have the tape at home, and what you hear is the silence, and then you hear bang, and I go, Wow, that's fast. And then one time we had Fred the bird from the Beretta show. Remember Beretta?
Yes.
Yeah.
We had Fred the bird up there, and
Cockatiel.
Fred's talking, and I'm thinking, you know, the audience has no reason to believe this is a bird. It could be anybody.
Yeah.
Up here. But yeah, that was they'd
Yeah.
parade him on up.
Well, you know, the people, the recording artists and stars and movie actors and all that used to, back in those days, we could have the doors wide open. You didn't even keep them locked. You know? And you'd be up there doing your show, and maybe you'd get a call from, say, hey, we're listening up on the toll road. Can we stop down? Yeah, Jay and the Americans or Chubby Checker came up. All kinds of
Four
people.
freshmen used to call. a lot.
Stop up to
we have
the
a
station.
picture.
We'd interview them on the air. They'd
Beach
hang
Boys,
around.
yeah.
We have a picture on that.
And so did Campbell. for
Wonder
that.
how many people remember these and may have one of these. Was one of our promotions when we were the Top Cats, if this will show.
Oh.
This is rather worn and
yeah.
faded, but this was in the closet at home, and we gave these out as
Top
promotions,
Cats.
and
John
we wore them
Signal
at
always
different
looked good in
events.
the top hat.
Had our
Yeah,
names
yeah.
on the back, and I know some people out there because I've had them tell me that they still have their Top Cats
I ran into
sweatshirt.
one of those guys 2 years ago in Milwaukee.
Ed Carr.
Ed Carr, yeah.
Ed
Eddie
Carr.
Carr, yeah.
Ed Carr and Doug Stevens, of course, were on staff after Underwood and you went off the air, and they became part of the staff at the time. We're on the basketball team.
Do you remember Bill Fisher at all, Don?
Well, I was gone when he came, but I knew him. I mean, I met
Bill
him,
was,
yeah.
you know, the late night news
Yeah,
guy.
right.
And he was on my show.
Yeah.
And Bill
Yeah.
would do every single night, he would make the same mistake. And after about 3 years, he was still doing it. And when you hear what it is, you won't believe it at all. Bill would come on in the midnight news at 12 midnight,
We're listening.
and he would do the first couple of stories, and he'd say, whoa, news time is 3 minutes after 12. It's 4 after 12 in Ohio and Michigan. He never
An hour later.
He did this for like 3 years. You know?
Yeah.
I will never forget that.
I had the worst experience of my life on air that I can remember, and you reminded me of it. When I was doing the night show, we had a newsman, Jim Slade, who does the space stuff for ABC
Yep.
and CNN.
Had a
Now,
big
he was
career.
our
Yeah.
yeah. And
He was Jim Snyder on the air.
yeah, well, Jim Slade on the air. Snyder's his
Snyder's
real
his
name.
Oh, Snyder's his real name.
And he would do the last news at midnight. I was on the 1 at that time, and I did the 1 o'clock news. I was the only one in the station, you know, rip and read off the wire newscast. And I started that newscast, and I got the hiccups. And I started and let out a big burp right on the air. And I thought, oh my God, I got 5 minutes to go, see? And I read some more and another burp. And I was so embarrassed. And so I got to the point where I was trying to time out the burps when I thought they were coming up so I could kill the mic for a second or so. I didn't make it. And I hiccuped all the way through a 5-minute newscast. I never felt so foolish in my life, Bob.
You just reminded
Nobody ever said anything about it, though, so maybe they weren't listening.
No, I had forgotten that, but I know what that would be. But I had a similar experience. I've learned never to eat popcorn before I go on the air. I was eating popcorn, and I had to do a 5-minute newscast, and I swallowed a kernel and it got stuck in my
Oh,
throat.
my.
And that was really my longest 5 minutes in radio.
Oh,
And there was no other way to go, really. When you had to do the news, you had to do the news. Ron always had a way to subvert the program directors, though. The program director, I remember one time, they didn't want Ron talking with the news person before the news.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, you know, when you're working at night, you know, you have the other person in the studio. And the program director said, look, I told the news person, when you hear what we used to call the boom in those days, that was the little Westinghouse news boom that would come on.
Yeah.
When you hear the boom, just read the news. Don't respond to anything that Ron says.
Yeah.
And the ID was live, and I remember I'm driving home after, I know that the program directors made a big deal out of this, and I'm driving home listening to Ron, and Bill Fisher was about ready to do the news, and Ron says 50,000 watts on 1190 WOWO Fort Wayne, Group W Westinghouse Broadcasting. Boom. And before Bill could say anything, he says, hey, Bill, what's that on your tie? Now, Ron had gone into the studio to look and see what Bill's first line was. So after Ron says, hey, Bill, what's that on your tie? Bill thinks, I got to read the news. So he goes, it's called the B-1 bomber. Program directors learn never give a direct order because, you know, Ron will either figure out a way around it or do it exactly that way every time.
Forgot all about that.
Oh, that's a good one.
You know, I had the hiccup thing too one time, and the guy put out a memo the next day. He thought it was a bit. He thought I was trying to be
He
funny.
said, don't do that anymore, huh?
He said, you know, it was funny for the first 30 seconds, but you kept hiccuping for like 10 minutes. And it was, you know, I had the Jack Surplus City sponsor.
yes.
And I could not convince him that I actually had the hiccups. I mean, people
Yeah.
are calling from Massachusetts and New York and Florida trying to give me remedies. breathe into
Yeah.
a paper
Yeah.
bag, swallow 7 times and do this, and, drink sugar.
All standing on your head, yeah.
What did you do to get rid of them?
It's the worst thing in the
What did you
world.
do to get rid of
I
them?
didn't. I had them through the whole 5-minute newscast.
The whole 5
Yes, I
And there's no way you can time it because it happens so quickly.
No, you think you can time when the next one's coming and you just can't
But
do
it really hurts when your boss thinks you're doing it on purpose.
purpose,
And
yes,
for the
yes,
next
yes.
week or so,
Yeah.
that's all I heard about.
I don't think the boss was listening at 1 in the morning. So
See,
I was
nowadays you
lucky there.
a spot and they're canned and they're
Yeah,
gone.
that's
This way you had to
right,
read them
that's right.
beside you.
Everything was
Couldn't take a deep
live.
breath and get rid of it.
Most of
Yeah.
our commercials we did were live
Yeah.
at that time, and so you didn't have a lot of space to
You know why
maneuver.
that was, though, Don? There is a reason behind that, which I found out, which I thought was pretty intriguing. At the bigger Westinghouse stations, not bigger in power, but in bigger cities, KDKA Pittsburgh and WBZ Boston and places like that, they had big union contracts with their announcers. And if a commercial was read by one announcer and ran outside of his or her show in another announcer's show, they'd get paid for that. So although we didn't have an announcers union here, they still followed that very same policy. They figured, well, if we make them read them live, then they can't appear in someone else's show.
That's interesting. How times have changed.
Yeah.
Names out of the past. We're talking about people like Sam DeVincent that people remember, and Jay Gould. And I'm thinking of names like Happy Herb Hayworth. Used
Happy
to be
Herb
out in the morning
Hayworth.
with Jay. Of
By
course.
the way, I talked to one out of the past yesterday. You fellows wouldn't remember it, but in the days when we had live talent, we had a local show called Sari and Elmer. I forget who played the male part, but Shirley Wayne Bowersox played the female part. She was Sari. And
And what year was this?
Oh, this goes back to when I first
40s.
started.
Ought to.
36 to 40, along in there.
Back when Marconi
Thanks
first
a lot.
printed Key and Flyers, Bob.
And
Everybody
Shirley
was listening on
left
their
for a
crystal set.
while to play the violin in the show, Broadway show, Hell's a Poppin'.
Yeah.
And what she did that was unusual, she'd play the violin with boxing gloves on. In Hell's a Poppin' on Broadway. And then she came back, and I know many people watching tonight will remember Sari and Elmer and Shirley Wayne Bowersox, and I said that sometime in the next few weeks when things slow down, I'm going to stop up and see her and
Is she
see her in
alive?
person. She's still alive.
She used to write continuity when I was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if she lives in the
Wow.
Fairfield Manor.
Bob,
Shirley
how
Wayne.
did she play the violin with boxing?
I
gloves?
did very well.
Very carefully.
Very carefully.
Yeah, but this was the, I don't know
Oh,
how
I'm
she did
sorry.
it. Yeah, she did.
You got me tripping here.
No. But that's
That
the name
was
out of the
typical of
past.
those old Ted Mack and Major Bo shows.
Al Cessna, news director.
Just talked to Hal a couple of weeks ago.
Bud Stone still in town.
He's still in
Morning
town.
news guy. I'm thinking
Retired,
of Joe
living-
Buchanan was on our mobile news unit at the time.
I still have his pipe.
his pipe. Yeah,
Oh.
Bob Edgington was the night news person. All names.
trying
that,
to think
Incidentally, I talked to Hal Cessna just a couple of weeks ago. He's retired living in Annapolis,
Oh,
Maryland.
really?
He had a great career in news, in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yeah.
radio news. And he and Shar having a great time out there. And
Oh, yeah,
big
that's
drive. We
great.
said, park the RV and away we go.
You know, we have a lot of firsts in some of the, the first generation broadcasters in this station, and Bob Chase, Don Chevrolet, Bob Sievers, you guys are first generation broadcaster guys
Yeah.
who got in it when it was still a young business,
Yeah.
a new business,
Yeah.
and worked it on up. I mean, for example, here's a guy like Bob Chase who has done play-by-play for the same hockey team for more than 40 years, and probably, as far as we know, you were the first disc jockey in the United States.
Could have come pretty close
to
to
it.
it because when they broke out of the network modes at that time, Bob, I believe, you were still in the Korean War, I believe. No, you were back by that time. But you were the hired hand in a Little Red Barn, and per se was a talent other than a just disc jockey.
Yeah.
And that's when Westinghouse began to experiment with putting together formats for disc jockeys. And they had people, Pack and Kalen would come down and they'd stay at the Keenan Hotel, and I would do a half hour or whatever, whenever they could do it. And they had wire tape at the time, and they'd tape it and play it back,
Yeah.
critique it.
Yeah.
And they'd add a little, and every time we drop a network piece, they'd give me another half hour. Well, finally we cleared out enough space where the word came down, okay, you have done a lot to work with this thing now. You've got your choice, morning drive or afternoon drive. So I picked 3 to 7 at that time, and then they moved Cal Stewart in to do the morning. And then, of course, as Cal elevated, then Jack came along, and it kind of went from there. And then after they changed that whole format, but Bob would always start, and I mean, he wasn't a disc jockey, he was a personality that played all kinds of music, religious, Western.
Originally,
country.
back in the 30s, actually, we didn't call it disc jockey, but we had block programming. We'd have a half hour by Jan Garber, one by
Right,
Guy
yeah.
Lombardo, and one by Rosario Bourdon and the Symphony Orchestra, and one by the Buccaneers Quartet on thesaurus transcriptions. But
I missed him.
Yeah, they were actually scripted shows, and they'd give you the transcriptions, and you'd pull them out, and
Yeah,
you could
yeah.
actually
You
play
didn't,
the
you
shows.
didn't own a
yeah.
crystal set, that's why.
I think he played
Whatever
bass for
happened-
Fleetwood Mac, didn't he?
Whatever happened to Benny Goodman and Tommy Dorsey? Who was that? Barsadio?
They came
Barbone?
later, Bob. yeah.
I think they came about 2 years later.
They were upstarts, yeah.
I was going to say.
Oh, yeah.
Paul Whiteman, that young kid,
Yeah.
people like that.
My God.
Wayne
That's
King.
amazing.
Well, Bob actually found the gold mine when he started, and I think I was fortunate enough to get in on the early stages of what I still consider the golden age of radio. I think we had more fun, did more things, had more service for more people.
Yeah.
And to say thank you, especially to WoWo and Westinghouse. We had a tremendous amount of effect on a tremendous amount of people. And we were always pros on the air, and including you guys as you came along into this thing. And that's why, yet today, and I travel all over the country now because of where the Hockey League has gone, and you can't believe the buildings I walk into, whether it's Orlando, Florida, the Omni in Atlanta when it was standing, Quebec City, Le Coliseum. Somebody always comes up and says, "You're Bob Chase, you're from WoWo. Boy, I've listened to you all," and then, "What happened to so-and-so? Is so-and-so?" I mean, how many people in how many radio stations anywhere in North America can say that?
Now, I want to
It's a
say,
pleasure,
I
Bob.
want to say something. I tune across the band at night, now hear hockey announcers all over the country. I've never told this to Bob in person, but of all the announcers, I think Bob does the finest job of describing hockey of any announcer I have ever heard.
Bob had his
And I
chances
mean
to
that.
go to the National Hockey League. I remember when the St. Louis Blues, you had a chance to get that job over Jack Buck, who had all the political pull in St. Louis, of course.
You know,
ended up with the
to
job.
go with that, the day I was appointed as the sales promotion manager at the station back in 1967, I got in the office at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm just reveling in the fact that I'm getting my hands on this situation. At 11:15, the phone rings, and it was a friend of mine from Detroit, Michigan, who represented the Stroh Brewery, who wanted me to come up and be the voice of the Red Wings.
Voice of the Red Wings.
I'll be darned.
And, you know, but that says something. There's so many of the WoWo announcers, be they play-by-play news disc jockeys, have had great opportunities and great offers. I know Bob and Sievers, Jack Underwood, been offered big positions in Chicago at WGN. Ron, there were a couple of program directors after us over the years in much larger cities.
Some of them right here in town.
Yeah.
You know, there's
Look at Underwood. He could have been the Dick Clark radio show.
That's my point. My point is that you know here here was this radio station that was fun to work at. It meant a lot because it was part of our family. Our kids grew up with it. We grew up with it. In Ron, in my case, as kids on it. And we loved the city. And it was this great flow back and forth between the audience and the station and the audience. At a time when you know when the station would even save lives. I mean, Bob, you landed an airplane with the radio station, didn't you?
Yes, right.
Tell a story.
Oh, well. Wait,
he doesn't remember.
This would have been the fellow who was lost in the fog.
Oh, yeah. But I haven't relived that story for so long. I think that was out at, was it Smithfield?
As I recall, he could hear WoWo. They determined that he could hear WoWo in the cockpit, but he could not communicate with the airport. And they,
I forget how we did it, though.
Well, people
but I
would
know
call
it
in
was
as-
foggy, and in some way I was able to help.
As I
I
recall,
don't
the
remember
airport
how.
called you and they said, "We think he's listening to WoWo for direction-finding purposes.
He was coming
We're going
up
to
from
take
Florida,
a chance."
wanted to find Fort Wayne.
Right, we're going to take a chance,
Yeah,
and then as I remember you telling me the story, this has been years and years ago. People called you then on the phone,
He just passed over my house.
Yes.
It was so foggy, and now it comes back, and he would get to the, he'd shoot past the runway. Somebody, "Oh, Bob, I live out in Arcola, and he's just out of my house now." Somebody, "Well, I'm in Coessey now. He's at," so I'd tell him where he was, and he'd look on the map, then he'd go back, and
He must have been
He had to
terrified.
circle Bearfield about, I think it was 8 times before he hit the runway.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You see some of the modern day
But
program
thanks to the
directors-
listeners, because they'd say, "He just flew over my house now." Yeah,
Some of the modern day program directors would have said, "Bob, can you interrupt that direction there? We got to play the #1 song."
Right.
But you know, it's amazing, Bob, that airline pilots who I have known over the years and basically have their navigational systems,
Yeah.
if they were going, say, from Minneapolis, say, into Cleveland, they would throw WOWO on ADF on AM and listen to
Yep.
it while they're riding the sky, and they'd make
Yeah.
the turn when they got to the pylon. you know?
Right.
You know, there's no way, there's no way that a radio station could ever dominate like that. Again, it can't be done. There's too
No.
many stations. Every town has its own little 2 or 3 FMs.
Sure.
Yeah.
And back in those days, the small towns had their little AM
Yeah.
station. And whoa, we used to come in to do personal appearances. They didn't like that because everybody listened to
Voice of a
WOWO.
Thousand Main
Yeah,
Street,
Voice of a
yeah.
Thousand Main Street. And now, of course, everybody goes for that little teeny chunk of the audience that you're going for now, and you hope you can get it and get a few ratings points out of it. Back then, everybody from 3 to 90 listened to WOWO. Everybody.
I won't hold
That's
this
the way
up
it
because it
was.
drives the cameras crazy, but this is maybe they can get a shot of it. It's a memo from a program director in 1980 from Ned Foster, who says, "Bulletin, once again, WOWO is #1 in the nation." And here's a list of 100 radio stations, and at the top of it, with the leading metro, what they call a metro cume rating, is WOWO with a 62.5.
Yeah.
That meant
That's
that they
unbelievable,
cycled
yeah.
62.5% of the people in this listening area through it in the course of a week.
Now, what year is that?
1980.
Oh, I was going to say 1987. I saw in the mailbox we were #1 with a 70 rating. I
Unbelievable.
saw that same sheet in 19 with
Yeah,
a
it-
70 rating.
Well, Chase,
phenomenal.
you remember back when the ratings at WOWO from morning till night were so high up there that some of the national buyers didn't believe them.
Well, I know.
They
at
thought they
that
were
time,
rigged.
I was in sales promotion at the time, and
Yeah.
we did this national presentation all over the country. Tommy Longsworth, Jim Cassidy, myself, we'd go out, and we went from border to border, coast to coast, and we had this. We called ourselves one of America's top 20 radio markets because actually our population didn't justify it. But with our half millivolt coverage, with the big circle we had enough to qualify as about the 15th radio market
Yeah.
in the nation. We'd come in with these figures, whether it was Chicago or San Francisco or Cleveland or Muncie, Indiana. And all of a sudden when they'd look at it, and this is no kidding, we'd have people saying, man, where do I sign up?
Yeah.
And we had the majority of all the national advertising business that came into this market, including the print business, because of the presentation we'd made by bypassing agencies, pardon my French, and going directly.
That took the dog and pony show.
Exactly, yeah,
Took the movie
right.
projector and everything
Yeah,
up to New
yeah.
York. But you guys came up with a great idea in those days, and that was you made this whole area out to be a major test market, and you interested the major national advertisers in testing products in this area.
Which it truly was.
And it was a nice play on words because it was called the Great Test Market, or the Great
Yeah.
Test
Yeah,
Market.
yeah.
It worked out real well.
I think there's some good promotional pieces in there that they can bring up to show some of the promotional stuff that
Yeah, and of
Just
course,
you and some,
we had the benefit of the greatest major
put out
marketing organization in the
stuff.
nation in Westinghouse Broadcasting, and at the lift of a phone, if you needed an idea or you needed people, man, they were here to support you and back you up. I mean, it was an education that you couldn't get through university. You had to be with the real experts, and they were just incredible.
Those of us that had the fortune to work at night, and you, Bob, early in the morning when it was still dark, the awesome power of the station was, it really
I'd
hit me
have,
right over the head.
I'd have missionaries who were born
Cuba,
and raised
Canada.
in Elkhart
Yeah.
hear me every morning in Africa,
Yeah.
and every winter I'd get about 50 letters from farmers in Norway and Sweden.
That's right.
They didn't tune in to hear Jay or me, but they wanted to get the price of corn and soybeans in the morning. And WOWO was the only stateside station they got consistently every morning of the year in Norway
The
and
first
Sweden.
week I was here, late at night, I picked up the phone, and this is even before we had the 800 number, so people had to pay for these calls. And the guy said, "Ron, you'll never believe where I'm calling from." "Where?" "Boca Raton, Florida." And he was so excited. I said, "Sir, can you hold on a second? I'm answering a postcard to a listener in Paris, France." Hang on just 1 second.
Yeah.
And that's actually a true story. I didn't keep him waiting long, but that's a true story.
Yeah.
There's a Navy, we got a letter once from a sailor, and he said that they piped WOWO onto the ship's PA. This was out in the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Piped the station
Yeah.
on to hear the music and whatever on WOWO
Yeah.
on a Navy ship in the Atlantic.
Well, during Desert Storm, there's a Marine captain from around the Cherubusco area who was on that attack carrier that the Marine Corps runs all their choppers from. And he said he could hear us at the proper times of the year all the way through the Mediterranean, but then when they went past the Suez and got into the canal and around the other side, they couldn't hear us any longer on nighttime. And he had asked me if I would say happy birthday to his 2 little kids on their birthday. So I called him to let him know that I was going to say it, and did. But they listened to us all the way through the
Isn't that something?
Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Well, there used to be, again, this, like you, when I started, I was doing the nights before going on afternoons. And on that night shift and early morning when you were on, I mean to tell you, I remember I used to get mail regularly from a missionary in the remote western part of Cuba, a husband and wife, and she wrote to say that they listened and got stateside news. It was the only station they could pick up. There was another fellow that used to listen up north of the Arctic Circle. He lived up there somewhere in nowhere land, and his mail, he said, had to come down from where he was to the nearest post office by dog sled, and then it was posted at that post office and came on, and used to read it on the air, and he left. That was his connection with the outside world.
When did Castro took over in about 59, I think it was?
Yeah,
59,
60,
59 or 60, and so they really, they were looking for entertainment at that point because everything, local was government controlled and propaganda.
Chase, you and I were at the very day of the Bay of Pigs, the very morning of the Bay of Pigs invasion. Chase, myself, Len Thornton, who else was along? I think George Drysdale and what's his name used to went on to Muskegon there for a while and came back and forth.
Joe Castleton.
Joe Castleton. 5 of us went up to Detroit in April because we wanted to see the Detroit Tigers season opener. My uncle managed Tiger Stadium, so he had his seats right in his private
Plus
box.
the Stanley Cup game.
Yeah. And then that evening we were going to the 7th and final game of the Stanley Cup, Chicago and Detroit.
That's when they retired Gordy's number.
Right. Snowstorm like you wouldn't believe when we got up there. It was so bad, Tiger Stadium was covered. Game was called. We managed to trudge through to the hockey arena and saw the hockey game, but on the way back it was still snowing, and there was no Interstate 69.
That's right.
Bob
Nor
had-
was there an Interstate 94.
Right. You had a big Oldsmobile station wagon driving. I was sitting in the front seat helping you see because the road was just 2 tire tracks, and the other 3 guys were in the back sleeping. Took us all night to get home, but we had Whoa on in the wee hours, and Jay Gould came on and mentioned that there had been an invasion of Cuba.
Yeah.
That was the same morning, and we were listening to that all the way home, and that was the one, same morning that happened.
There's a one report that I know of the station literally going all the way around the world that I'm aware of. I'm sure there are others, but for some of the viewers who might not know, the signal is pushed to the east at night to protect some of the western stations on the same frequency. And so we got a call one night, it was about 10 o'clock at night, from a guy in a phone booth in Los Angeles. And he said, I can hear Whoa in Los Angeles. He said, I'm kind of a DXer here.
It had to be going around.
And so we didn't believe him because we'd never gotten any reports of being heard in Los Angeles before because we knew we went out east. And so he said, no, I can prove it. He said, you call me back. And so he gave us the phone number, the phone booth, the 213 area code, whatever. We called him back. He answered the phone, and he went out and got his radio and brought it up to the phone, and we could hear it. So we knew we were talking to a phone booth.
You remember, Chris, how bananas the management went when I put the guy on from England that time, or called over there to let him talk to his family?
Yes, that's right.
Oh my gosh.
Again, no Watts lines at that point.
That's right.
This is like 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think there was a law back in those days of personal messages or something like that.
Yeah,
But it was
no
interesting. I mean,
personal
it was
messages.
broadcast for the general
right.
public. It was an interesting thing.
So this poor guy called one night. He says, "Ron, I miss my family. They're over in South London." And I said, "Well, no problem. Let's." On the air, you hear the dial tone. You hear the operator, the overseas operator. Yeah, put them through, guys. They talked for like 20 minutes. The next day, the bill came in.
My gosh.
$300 or $400.
Seconded only by the ship-to-shore bill that I got, or that the station got when Ron called me out. I was out in the middle of Lake Erie.
Yeah,
I'm out there on my boat, and at the time I had this boat. It was called Chris's Craft, and I hear.
Chris's Craft. That's
I hear Chris's Craft, Lorraine Marine Mobile, and I'm thinking, who's calling me? Who would even know I'm out here? So I go back to the lady, and she says, well, move me up to another channel, and she said, hold one moment, please, for Ron Gregory.
Oh my God. Oh wow.
on the air.
That's funny.
So the engineers came in. I think they had some legal problem with that. I don't recall what it was, but it worked anyway.
Speaking of legal
none of us ever
problems,
went to jail. So.
Speaking of legal problems, you remember when Calvin Richards became promotion manager, a job that you had for so long. And you remember we first got our new two-way radio? And all of these rules and regulations, it can only be used for this, and never would you do any personal messages or anything. And what did he do?
He ordered a pizza on it. We have a second, more in a format like this that we don't have in lots of other times. And I got to hear the story for once and for all from the man it happened to during the Cold War era back in 1971 when the big alarm went off and by accident the government of the United States and the military sent down the code words that indicated this country may be under nuclear attack. That was 1971, Saturday morning, usually at a time when there was a test at 9:30 in the morning.
And it was in October.
And you are,
October, Bob.
you are the sole operator now with the news person of the most powerful broadcasting station in the area. And what did you do?
Well, first of all, we had 3 news machines, United Press, Associated Press, and International News Service. As you know, in those days, every time we got a bulletin, the bell would ring 10 times. We'd tear the bulletin off and go in the studio and read it. Well, this particular Saturday morning, all 3 machines were running the 10 bells. So I went to them, and there was silence. Nothing was printed. And finally, they printed alert, 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 alert. Then they were silent again. I thought, what in the world do I do now? And I thought, well, the only thing I can do is be honest. I said, folks, we evidently have some kind of an emergency. I don't know what it is, but you stay tuned and I'll let you know the moment I know. We were the control station. And so I went back in the top 25, the record I had on was Easy Going on Your Nerves. It was, this is unusual.
Wasn't it? Wasn't it? Where do I begin?
And it was Henry Mancini and the orchestra and the love theme from Romeo and Juliet. So it was 2.5 minutes long. The record ended. The machines were still silent. So, in the meantime, they did print a code word. And I reached back on the wall and tore off the envelope, only if we had a code word. And I looked at the code word, it was cauliflower. And I looked, and lo and behold, on the news machines, the code word was cauliflower. So I told the folks then, folks, we definitely do have some kind of emergency. I still don't know what it is, but I have received the secret code word. I have verified the code word. Now again, stay tuned, and I'll let you know the instructions that follow. So I put the needle back and went through Henry Mancini again. Then finally, the bells started ringing. Disregard, forget, mistake. Then I went in and said, folks, the story does have a happy ending. They sent us the wrong tape, so there is no emergency. But I tell the folks I'm out speaking, that 5 minutes in which I played Henry Mancini and the orchestra and the love theme from Romeo and Juliet through twice was the longest 5 minutes of mine in
Your life.
And also
That was at the height of the Cold War when things were very tense.
Oh, right.
Another point of the story was, weren't you the only guy in the whole country that did it the right way?
I don't know about that.
I mean, wasn't that?
Well, I'll tell you, I was working in Cleveland at the time, and I was playing cards with one of the other disc jockeys, and I heard the 10 bells go off, and I thought, well, that's the Saturday morning test. It's 9:33.
And it usually came about that.
And so I ignored it. By the time I got back, I didn't, and I had to write a rather lengthy letter to the Federal Communications Commission explaining why I didn't do what you did.
But I seem to remember, you weren't the only one. I seem to remember of all the 50,000 watt stations in the country that were supposed to alert all the smaller stations.
The whole system actually fell apart.
That Bob Sievers was the only one that actually followed it word for word and
But I thought,
and hit the alarm.
Sure.
I thought, in doubt though, what can you do other than be honest?
Well, we're dealing here with a Navy man who,
listening to you,
Yeah.
with a Navy man who
Oh,
addressed the Joint Chiefs of Staff at
That
one
really
time.
was my longest 5 minutes in radio.
Bob, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just going to tell you one shocking story, and I have many. I've got notes scribbled here, but one of the most shocking stories I've experienced was about 3 years ago. I was listening to, and I tune across the band at night, hear all my favorite talk show hosts, and I was listening to WJR Detroit. It was 1:25 on a Sunday morning, and the fellow said, folks, we have some sad news to announce tonight. He said, an announcer that I grew up with as a boy in Dayton, Ohio, died yesterday, and it was none other than Bob Sievers of WOWO.
I remember that.
And I heard that, I really woke up. I pinched myself, and I thought, what the heck, I'm alive. And I thought, I can't let that go on. So, and he's giving his phone number, so I called his phone number.
But think of the insurance you could have called.
So I called him up, and I said, hi, is this so-and-so? Yeah. He said, who is this? I said, this is Bob Sievers. There was a long pause. He says, "Where are you calling from?" I said, "I'm calling from heaven."
A payphone right next to the pearly gate.
So anyway,
Make a movie
what,
out of
what it
that.
was, 2 days before that, a lady had called him, who worked for General Motors and moved here from Wisconsin, and got me mixed up with Jack Underwood. It was Jack Underwood who had just passed away.
Oh, yeah.
She told him that I had died, and he was shocked because he grew up listening to me.
Oh, my gosh.
I thought it was the old baseball player Roy Sievers, maybe.
No.
Roy Seaver, yeah.
You know, for
the
years,
Washington
people,
Senators.
people
Right.
have always confused Ron and me. Have they turned out?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
absolutely.
definitely.
I'll have people, because
Yeah.
you and I came here about the same time, and,
Right.
and people will come up to me, they'll say, Ron, how you doing?
And I always tell him, no, he's the one with all the money.
Yeah, right. And so I never correct them. You know, it's just. Do they
Yeah.
call you Chris sometimes?
Oh, yeah, all the time. Tell him,
Bob Jason me. I don't know how many times people
Yeah.
thought I was Bob Jason, to this day.
Yeah.
The only thing I regret, it has gone by too fast. I
fast.
cannot believe.
Yeah.
I mean, this fellow, I'm just a kid compared to him, and I've got 45 in here.
Yeah.
And I just can't put a finger on
Where
it.
did it
really.
go, huh?
Yeah.
You remember speaking in when we used to sing as disc jockeys, you know, first of all, the Pussycats, when we
Yeah.
went up against the Beatles. That was really something.
Yeah.
We were singing, Sam DeVinson came up with the idea, and the Beatles were coming to Indianapolis, September of '64, on their first U.S. tour. So we got a promotion up. And of course, we're singing, and so we decided to go on the air and play our songs on the air. And as I said, we were out doing personal appearances. We were singing everywhere.
Yeah.
And we were asking people to send in and vote who they liked the best, the Pussycats or the Beatles. Well, of course, you know, the Pussycats got a lot of votes, just if it's a joke. But at any rate, as Bob will tell you, we ended up getting, what was it, over 50,000 pieces of mail
Oh, yeah.
in response to that promotion, of which 50 people were picked to go down there, and we, the DJs, took them down.
Yeah.
And we had a Beatle bus, regular Greyhound with signs all over it, Indianapolis, the Beatles and all. And we used to sing, and I remember we sang at the Coliseum when the Rolling Stones came in. I have that at home in pictures. We sang the Dave Clark Five. When they played, it was his birthday. So we got up on the stage and sang happy birthday to
Yeah.
Dave Clark. I mean, that was quite a promotion. And Sam DeVinson has all of those recordings of all of those songs we did, which is out in his collection. His wife, Nancy Lee, has it. It takes up about 6 rooms and a 2-car garage. Really, all in order, organized perfectly like Sam did.
After the rest of
But
it
it's all out there.
Smithsonian.
That's right, after
Yeah.
the
It was the ultimate collection.
Yeah.
You remember when I used to sit in for you in the morning on the Little Red Barn show
Yeah.
every once in a while, and you had a portion of the show where you'd play only country music.
Oh
Yeah.
boy.
Remember that? So here I come wheeling in from Washington.
When the boss would be
Yeah.
asleep.
The boss didn't like it either, right?
And about the first week I was in there, I started playing jazz records, you know, Benny Goodman and Buddy Rich and stuff.
Yeah.
Remember? And I had a guy call with the same thing that happened to you, with the cow that wouldn't give milk anymore because he just couldn't get into Buddy Rich's beat. You know? But a lot of people enjoyed that. A lot of people liked that.
Oh, yeah.
And it
Well,
was such
Bob
an
used
honor
to, you know, we were in a
And then
rock
Chris would
format.
fill in for you too, I think. So we all had a chance to do that morning show at one time or another.
Oh, yeah.
When you play Franklin McCormick's Melody of Love, the boss
Yeah.
let you know about it, right?
I always say when so many announcers get together, this would be an excellent place to build a radio station.
Yeah, right here, yeah.
You know, Bob put something together that I used to like when I did my standbys for him or did the Monday mornings. When Bob would get in, the first thing he'd do, put a tape up on the reel and start making his police calls. He'd call every sheriff and state police and
Yeah.
the lower border of Michigan, northwest corner of Ohio, and all
Paw,
through
Michigan,
northern
to
Indiana.
Pendleton, to Van Wert, Ohio.
And, the people looked forward to it, including the officers themselves.
Yeah.
They were always
That's
about
right.
and around.
That's right.
And I mean, if you happened one day maybe somebody wasn't available or you missed them, I'll guarantee within 5 minutes somebody'd call and say, "What's going on in Papa? We haven't heard from them yet this morning."
yeah,
And
that's right.
But I mean, it prepared the day, honest to goodness, regionally, for the news department.
Yeah.
Anything overnight, he had it on tape.
Yeah.
and
That, and
covered.
it was just darned interesting to listen
Yep.
to, because you know, even though you taped those calls ahead of time, Bob, the audience hadn't heard them yet, and they would get their very first bits of information. And just a year and a half ago, living in Van Wert now, where I operate a couple of businesses over there, I got a chance to go to the retirement party of the lady who used to talk to almost every morning, Jo Van Meter.
Joe, I remember.
I
I remember her.
She just retired from the Ohio State the Highway
If you,
Patrol.
you see her,
Really?
you tell her we met.
I
and
sure
said
will.
hello.
Yes,
my
uh-huh.
Well, she can watch the show. She'll see.
You know, Bill Fisher and I celebrated our birthday the same day, and we went over to Joe Van Meter's. He went with me for dinner that night. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 12:04 in Ohio and Michigan.
Yeah, in Ohio and Michigan.
Oh, yeah, tell Joe I said hello.
Oh, my Goodness sakes.
Well, this has been fun today.
A lot of
reminiscing.
memories
Yeah.
at that radio station. That's, as I said, I don't think there could ever be another one like it. Radio is not that way anymore. You
No,
just couldn't
no,
have a
it's not.
station dominate like WOWO did.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you hit a point there when you say WOWO was, again, very special beyond the point of it just being an exceptional radio station. There were a lot of other good radio stations around the nation, and many of them were 50,000-watt stations, but there was an effect this station had. When you cruised the dial, and I found this to be very true, you could set it on a signal seek, and when
Yeah.
it came back, when you hit WOWO, there was a sound to that signal. You knew you were home.
That's right.
Yeah.
Bingo, it was there. And you could pass a lot of other stuff, but
Yeah.
bingo, boy, when it hit the WOWO spot,
Yeah.
you were locked.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It was so dominant. I mean, even our news people were celebrities. Like when we would do that beach ball up at Lake
Yeah.
James or anything else. I mean, even the news people, Bud Stone and Seston and all, people rushing up for their autographs and all. I mean, where else would you find
Yeah.
the newsmen
Yeah.
being, you know,
Yeah.
personalities like? But they were. And it was just amazing. You look
People
back
like,
on that now and you think, how could that ever have been?
People like Art Salzberg, who's still there.
Yeah.
Art
It started
Salzberg.
in news.
And
Remember
I-
Ed Kasuba? Remember
Ed
Eddie
Kasuba, you're right,
On to
right.
Philadelphia.
Absolutely.
KYW. That's
Jim Slade that you mentioned.
Yeah,
was such a
Bill
good-
Reese.
He's big with ABC now, Jim Slade.
Yeah,
Funny
he does
thing,
all
I
the
gave
space
Jimmy his
stuff
first
from the Cape.
airplane ride. When
Jim
he,
Slade?
when he was a newsman at WOWO, we had Winter Wonderland going up at Pokagon, and it was a quick day, and in order to get there and back, I went out to Smith and got a Cessna 172, and Jimmy and I flew up there because we had some things to do, and then we came back, and that's the first time Slade had been in an aircraft. And from that point on, I mean, it's his
Here's
Now
a,
he's
spa-
the
here's
guy,
a space
yeah.
expert
Yeah,
now
yeah.
He
on the
covers
space
the
yacht.
Kennedy Space Center for
Yeah.
ABC now.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
He was a little. He was another one that shocked people when they saw him.
Yeah.
Jim Slade was probably 4 feet 8, about 85 pounds.
He was an inch
That's
taller
right.
than Abe
big
Albright.
booming
Yeah.
voice, you know. In the air, people see him and they were in total shock.
I just have one question. When are Chris and I going to get to do some funeral home commercials? I mean, if I see you two one more time,
Yeah, you got me sold.
you guys have been dying for the last 10 years now.
And
you know, and getting paid for
we
it.
didn't trade it out either.
Anytime
Chris, do you remember the first time you ever
gone
came to
over
Fort
2
Wayne
hours.
and what happened then? Do you remember the first time you ever came to Fort Wayne and what happened then?
Yes, I came to town. The program director at the time was a PhD, Dr. Roger Skolnick.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And Roger came to where I was in Canton. I was program director of a station in Canton, Ohio, and said, well, you know, now we know what you look like and what you sound like, and why don't you come and see what we look like and sound like and see if you'd be interested. And I said, I probably will be. So he said, well, come on into town, let's talk about it. So I drove into town and stayed, I think, at the Ramada out on 14. And he says, we're going to a party tonight. He said, a couple of our employees at the station have these famous parties. And he said, a lot of theater people and broadcasters come to these things. Well, it was in a house in the Northcrest edition. And when you were fortunate enough to have one of these parties, to host one of these parties, you went way out. These people took everything out of their house and put it in storage so that they could fit the hundreds of people who would show up at this party. So here's my first night in town, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm at this party, and it was so crowded in this house that you literally couldn't walk through it. You were there, and everyone was there. And there were many of those parties in succeeding years.
But do you remember when you drove into town?
Yeah, I drove right through it. Yeah.
I did the same thing when I first came.
Didn't
to
you
town.
stop in New Haven and
Well,
you thought
what
that
happened
was Fort
was,
Wayne?
I was coming in on 30 from Canton, and it was a Saturday morning that same day, and I drove through New Haven, and I drove right past WOWO. Didn't even see it downtown. At the time, it was in the Gaskins Building on Washington. Drove right past it, and I got all the way out to I-69. And I thought, you know, as I looked on the map, I saw New Haven and Fort Wayne, and I saw a smaller dot of yellow indicating an urban area, which was New Haven. I didn't realize at the time, and a larger dot of yellow. And I thought, well, any town that's going to have a 50,000-watt radio station owned by Westinghouse is going to be a much bigger community. So I thought that downtown Fort Wayne was New Haven.
Oh my
You
gosh.
know, we only had we had the Fort Wayne National Bank and the Lincoln Tower at the time. But I went right through it, and I stopped at there's a gas station right at the intersection there at 69 and 24. And it was at the time. I think it's like the plant center now or something. There's a pure gas station. And I pulled in there and to ask directions, and I was filling up the car with a guy who came out to fill up the car with gas. And he said, I was asking him where Fort Wayne was. He said, well, you passed it. He said, I saw you coming this way. I said, yeah. He said, you went right through it. So he said, what do you need to find? And I said, WOWO. And he says, oh. He said, are you going to work at WOWO? And I said, yeah. Now this guy's pumping gas into my car. He said, are you going to work at WOWO? And I said, I think so. He said, I used to work at WOWO. So I'm thinking, well, here's my future.
Wow.
Here's an
Oh,
omen.
my God.
Yeah, there's an omen,
Oh,
right? But,
that's-
but when I finally, the funny thing is, when I finally got the job and it was offered to me, and I accepted it, Roger said, I need you to be here in exactly 1 week's time. He said, now when you get here, he said, for gosh sakes, whatever you do, don't go up the elevator and walk in. He said, I'm going to have to explain you to Mr. Vandegrift. I looked considerably different in those days, as many of us did. Much longer hair. And so he went into Carl Vandegrift and he said, Mr. Vandegrift, he said, I have a new announcer out here. Now, you heard his tape. He doesn't look like he sounds, but he's an okay guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be darned.
Yeah,
That's
that,
amazing.
When I first met Carl, it was only like 4 months before you. I think I got here in March, and you were in like, what, October or something like that?
September, yeah.
73? September.
Yep.
And I had been in Baltimore for a year and a half, and then before that, college. So the longest tenure I had at a station was a year and a half. And I walked in, and he says, Ron, I want you to sign a 2-year contract. And I said, 2 years? I don't know, Mr. Vandegrift. 2 years. And he says, Ron, it'll go by like that.
Yeah.
Well, that was 26 years ago. I mean, but it just goes to show you how comfortable and professional the station was.
It was a fun place.
And once you
to
got there,
work.
you didn't want to leave.
Well, you know, I was really impressed with it again because when I first came in, Bob was gone. This was the Korean days, and Bob wasn't there, but occasionally Bob would come home on a little rehab and stuff, and you'd walk in the building and the receptionist would say, Bob Seaver's. And he'd be in with Jane Weston or whatever the story's talking and telling sea stories and whatnot. But the staff we had at that time on the air, from our news people to our other announcing staff, they were so incredible. I mean, the voices that they were better voices than a lot of the network stuff, and they were all just great people. And we had one fellow in particular who had one of the greatest booms in the world. Remember Dan Minter?
Oh, yeah.
Wow, I mean, he spoke out of the basement all the time. In fact, Dan's still around. He's up in South Bend these days, but he was a great announcer.
Oh, he is.
And then, of course, once it went to the music format, things did a lot of changing. The news people kind of fanned off and went to other news, news operations because we didn't have the same intensity with news. And it changed around an awful lot. And, of course, the guys who survived it were you and Jay Gould.
I listened to the station when I lived in South Bend, right up till the time I came to work over here. I mean, we had radio stations. I was working at the one out at Notre Dame. But whoa, and that's what I listened to.
Well,
That's why-
you know, it's
such a
interesting,
thrill
Jim.
when I got the job.
They're memories for the listeners, but for us, this is our life, and I don't think any one of us would have done it any other way.
No.
Muncie, Bronson, Marion, Paulding, Portland, Kendallville, Antwerp, Busco, Vernon, Columbia City too. Wabash, Bryan, Hartford City, and Garrett, Albion, North Manchester, Ligonier, Salina, and Winchester. They're all part of a great place, and Wallowing is a great place to be. WRWR, 1190 is up there. 1190 is high. Who said man wasn't meant to fly? Give it a try with whoa, 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 whoa. You're a winner. You've got